Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the National Commissioner of Cyber Patriot, Brigadier General Bernie Scotch.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Ken. We hope you had a good visit with our friends from industry in the exhibit hall. If you haven't made your way there, I strongly encourage you to, because there's so much to appreciate there. Continuing our theme of innovation, Future Force Faster, we have today a distinguished speaker, Dr. Will Roper. Dr. Roper has bachelor's and master's degrees in physics from Georgia Tech. He has a PhD in mathematics from Oxford. He has previously served as the founding director of the Strategic Capabilities Office in the Pentagon and was the acting architect for the Missile Defense Agency. Right now, he's responsible for and oversees research, development, and acquisition activities totaling an annual budget in excess of $40 billion for 465 acquisition programs. Would you please join me in giving a big AFA welcome to Dr. Will Roper.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think Larry Spencer set the tone this morning. Good afternoon. Thank you. Look, I hope that you enjoyed the Secretary's talk this morning. You really don't need to hear anything more from me about how excited we are about acquisition in the Air Force. Right? Going faster is not just a tagline for us. It is a dead serious business about keeping the Air Force competitive and dominant. So my goal is to simply follow up and provide supporting fires and hopefully leave you as excited as I am about what our acquisition team is doing. I'm going to take some questions this morning, so I believe they're going to put up on the screen a email or number to text questions to, and in about 30 minutes we'll switch over and really dive down into what you want to know about Air Force acquisition. And for our industry partners that are here, we really want to make working with us as easy as possible. We want to take friction out of the system, gain back the time that we lose to bureaucratic steps that don't make sense. So we're going to talk a lot of things about how acquisition is speeding up, becoming faster and smarter. But I would be remiss to not hit on two of the most important components of why we care about this: who is doing it and why we're doing it. So the who is much, much broader than the acquisition team. Who starts with our warfighters, right? Acquisition separated from the warfighter cannot go fast. The warfighter is the ultimate customer. Everything is about their mission. And one of the things that we are greatly blessed to have in the Air Force is some of the closest relationships between the acquisition community and the warfighter that I have ever seen. If you weren't in our world, just on a daily basis, it's phone calls back and forth to the MAGCOM, working issues in real time, as opposed to exchanging documents via the mail. So whether it's standing up the Space RCO with General Raymond, or working on accepting the KC-46 with General Miller, or trying to figure out what an advanced battle management system really is with General Holmes, it's a close dialogue, it's a close level of trust. It takes a team to go fast. And the team is bigger than the warfighter in acquisition. It's legal, it's finance, it's test. If you take nothing else from this talk, take that the Air Force, not Air Force acquisition, the Air Force has decided to go fast. And the reason is the second part. It's why. The why is that we're competing against peers. It's a time of unprecedented technological change. Those two things should give us pause. We have a very different type of adversary, one that can match us, one that can build systems that are commensurate with ours, ones that can counter systems that we use today. But the thing that's different, folks, is the rate at which, the pace at which technology changes today. We cannot look back at the Cold War and pull that playbook out to win. We're going to need a new one for this day and age. So if you look around at commercial innovation, if you're not reading technology blogs daily, you're behind. The rate at which change is happening should make us excited. There are new technologies we can bring to bear to stay dominant and challenge our adversaries. But if we don't speed up our system, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine beating a peer if our acquisition system is slower and fundamentally short-sighted. We must have the fastest acquisition system to compete and win. So going fast, it's not a tagline, it's not a byline, it's not a talking point. It is about bringing a competitive mindset to acquisition. It is about looking where an adversary is going, getting there ahead of them, imposing cost so that we win. Future airmen are counting on us, seizing today, seizing tomorrow, day after day, for decades. And we're going to need a new playbook to do it. I want to say that the team that you have in Air Force acquisition is up to this challenge. The talent that I have gotten to see over the last year is amazing. Air Force, congratulations on putting time into training and educating and getting your acquisition workforce to be the most professional, the most highly educated that I've seen. I believe we are head above heels above anyone else in the government, and it pays off. We are up to the challenge of competing in this high-tech world. We are up to the challenge of fundamentally speeding up the pace at which we buy things. You know, there's really no silver medal. There will be no podium spot for having the world's second best Air Force. So it's up to us to make sure that doesn't happen. And I hope that some of the things that I go through today and some of the things that the Secretary covered this morning convince you that we don't intend to. So the way that we're going to be able to keep gold and win are 4 steps. We're doing things in all of them, but we have to do all 4 of them for this system, this strategy to close. If the PowerPoint slide gods are helping us, step 1, you've probably already guessed. We have to supercharge our acquisition engine. Nothing else matters if we are slower than the opponent. So you've probably heard, if you follow acquisition, things like Section 804 or tailoring from the Secretary's talk this morning. I want to take you down a level so that these words help you understand what we are doing in programs to speed up. What is the mechanism that we are using to take time out of our schedules, as the Secretary mentioned? So let's start with 804. If you've never heard of it, it's an authority that Congress gave us. It encourages acquisition programs to be tailored to the minimum set of things that are needed to accomplish their intention. Don't do things that are extraneous. And so what we're doing with the authority are exploring ways to accelerate buying things earlier. And we've found roughly 4 types of programs that tend to benefit from starting to bend metal immediately by taking time to think about it. The first are programs where there is a dominant risk buried inside the program that you're just wasting time on paper analysis and thinking. You need to be bending metal to truly retire that risk. And programs like Next Generation Overhead Persistent Infrared, highly important satellite program, going to protect our airmen, our Navy, our soldiers and Marines from the launches of missiles, critically important program. The hardest part of that program is the sensor that we have to make, a completely new sensor from the satellites we have on orbit today. So if you step back from that program, why would we want to wait and delay building that sensor? You retire the risk by starting early. And so we've used the authority to effectively shift the sensor forward and let the satellite build follow its normal course. It's a smart acquisition strategy. It's 3.5 years faster than a normal satellite build. There are other types of programs where we're working with commercial providers, and we know who we'll be working with. We know the market. It's no mystery about who is going to be competing. And so delaying getting industry on contract is simply delaying delivering for the warfighter. So programs like the B-52 commercial re-engine, right? We're going to put commercial engines on the B-52, hopefully extend its availability far into this century, extend its range through fuel efficiency. But we're using commercial engines. We understand who builds them. So why would we spend over a year studying the market when we could go ahead and put those vendors on contract and start working immediately? So when we're working with commercial systems, this 804 authority lets you bump things to the left and get started, focused on delivering for that warfighter. The next kind of program is software. We're going to talk about that in detail today. Software is, we could give a whole talk on it. It follows none of the old rules that most of your Air Force acquisition professionals were trained. I was trained in an era where software was a product. You delivered it, kind of like on a CD, right? Your AOL CD came in the mail. It's a product that's delivered. Software as a service, it's a pipeline today. I want to help you understand that because if you're part of the Air Force, software touches your life. And you need to understand how we have to develop software differently if we're going to keep our dominant edge. So programs like F-22 Pipeline, Unified Platform have done amazing work trying to shift a traditional acquisition program that has milestones into a continuous stream of deliveries. So I'm going to cover that a bit later. It's a very important point. And the last kind of program is the one that most people tend to think of when they think of an 804 accelerated program. That is good old-fashioned prototyping. Things like Hypersonics that the Secretary mentioned this morning. We don't really have hard and fast requirements from the warfighter. It's crystal clear that the operators in the first couple of rows want a hypersonic weapon as fast as we can give it to them. They're willing to trade range up to a point. They're willing to trade payload up to a point. Just don't fail and don't wait. And so that is a perfect example of not sitting, not analyzing, bend metal, get moving, deliver for the warfighter. There might be another type of program, but those are the four. That over the last year of applying Section 804, it appears there are four flavors of this middle tier of acquisition that benefit from this extreme tailoring. Not every program should be put through 804. There are programs that are highly complicated, integrated weapon systems. Things like ground-based strategic deterrent has risk everywhere, and it's all interconnected. And the full burden of our acquisition system does tend to help programs of that nature. But they are few and far between, Air Force. Not every program is a Minuteman replacement or a Columbia-class submarine. So applying this lethargic Cold War acquisition system to every program is just plain dumb. And so what the 804 Authority has done for us, it's made it crystal clear that Congress wants us to tailor, wants us to streamline, wants us to move. But there's a next chapter in this story, is that the 804 Authority, I'm letting you in on a secret, so keep it in this room, is not that different than the 5000 acquisition system. If there was no Section 804 Authority, we would still be giving talks on faster, smarter acquisition. We would still be tailoring. I don't think we'd be as close to the 100-year mark, but we would be close. Because the original 5000 series says, tailor your program. And somehow, over the past couple of decades, that message has been lost in reams and reams of regulations and optional regulations that do not add value to delivering. And so we have now had 5,000 programs wake up and say, wait a second, we don't have to let these 804 programs have all the fun moving quickly. We're going to do it too. And now we are about at a 2/3, 1/3 mix between our Section 804 programs and our tailored 5,000, pulling time out of our program, stealing it back from the enemy, and giving it to our warfighters. Secretary mentioned this morning, we're at 78.5 years. And that's in about 9 months of applying these authorities. Like 78.5 years. Can we imagine looking at a timeline of Air Force deliveries and being able to shift things 78 years to the left? It's a huge advantage, and we're not even close to being done. As I look ahead into the pipeline of programs that are coming, so the ones that will come in for reviews over the next couple of months, there's about another 16 or 17 years, getting us up to 96 within the next couple of months. So that 100-year century challenge, we're going to meet it in less than a year from the time we began. And that is just our calling card to the Air Force, to the department, and to our adversaries and allies, that we are going to move at the speed of relevance. And time is going to matter to us. So if you are part of an Air Force program, if you have tailored your program, if you have taken time out, will you put your hand up? Folks, we really should give these folks a hand. They have done an awesome job this year. So I'm extremely pleased with the response. Could not be prouder of our airmen in acquisition. So that's the speed part. We're tailoring, taking the necessary steps out. There are a lot of things that we're starting to do that are smart, that are making our programs better, lower risk, lower cost, and likely will speed us up on the whole. I want to highlight a few of them before we move on. The first is using competition smartly, and I really have to thank the warfighters that are here. We have some of the most savvy MAGCOMs in acquisition of any service. I'm willing to put a period there. Right. They understand that if they set requirements so high that competition goes away, that they're raising the risk of doing their mission. And so we have some of the closest relationships of setting the requirements where they can get the job done, and we can make sure that we have multiple industry partners who can compete. And over the past year, we've seen over $15 billion in savings from getting competition right. That's smart. $15 billion is another program or two. So getting things smart stretches our dollars and lets us do more to compete and win. Another thing that we're doing really well, but we need to do a lot more of, is digital engineering or model-based system engineering. If you were to go out to our ground-based strategic deterrent program, that's the Minuteman replacement, you are going to see digital models that will blow your mind. It is like having a digital oracle there that can see the future of that program. When I was managing programs, being able to look at 10 to 20 designs was going above and beyond the call of duty. This program can look at millions in a day. It's amazing capability. So it's so impressive to me that we're going to be sending junior acquisition professionals through that program on rotations because we want the next generation of acquisition professionals to think that's the way a major weapon system could be run. It allows us to trace design to performance to cost in the blink of an eye. And so if in future that becomes the standard, I think it will control our cost, it will let us compete better, and ultimately save money so we can put it into advanced capabilities. Happy to see other programs are starting to adopt, like the A-10 Wing program is using digital engineering. And we're very excited about TX and the digital engineering that that program brings to try to break the cost curve. But these are shining points of light, and we need a light tower. We need something that casts a broad shadow across our Air Force so that this is the way we start doing business. And the last thing I want to highlight is software. So the Secretary focused on that this morning. It's important that she did. This is a big deal, Air Force. We can build the best airplanes and satellites, but we'll lose if we can't update the software at the speed of relevance in this century. Now, if you're not into acquisition, I'll drop a few terms on you and try to explain what they mean. The way that software was developed in the last century is often called waterfall. It's where you have a line of effort that ends, and then it drops into another effort that ends, and it drops into another effort that ends, kind of like a waterfall if you were to see it on a chart. When you develop software that way, you're really hoping that as you move from one rapid to the next, that you're not taking errors with you, that you're not accumulating dysfunction or bugs. And whenever I had to have a software program go through debugging, I would just be like praying and holding horseshoes and four-leaf clovers, just hoping that it worked. And that's not how software is developed today. It's developed in a process that's called Agile, where increments happen in a cycle, not a waterfall. Operators and users working together with each other, delivering code on a monthly basis, and not letting the errors accumulate over time and snowball. It's as simple as that. It's a complete shift in the paradigm. And it's enabled by tools that are amazing today. Cloud-based development tools fundamentally speed up the development pace of software. That's why cloud exists. If you talk with companies like Google or Amazon, shifting to cloud speeds up the pace of software development. So we have to go there too if we're going to remain relevant. So places like Kessel Run, which you've heard of, it's a cool name from Star Wars, are doing great coding on AOC, Air Operations Center, Pathfinder, Mad Hatter, the Secretary mentioned. We're taking Alice. We have the source code hosted in a cloud. We're starting to pull it apart, productize it. And rather than deliver increments on a yearly or every other yearly basis, we're going to be pushing code to warfighters first every other month and then every month. And that's a joint team between the Air Force, between the JPO, and between Lockheed Martin. Great partnership and enthusiasm for moving fast. But Kessel Run isn't all we have. Out at SMC, Space and Missile Center, they're standing up their first software factory called Kobayashi Maru. If you're a Star Trek fan, you might recognize that. That is the impossible scenario that Kirk hacked the code so that it could be beaten. So we've covered both universes of nerddom, so I feel like we've balanced things within the Air Force, and our software motto is now, may the force live long and prosper. So Kobayashi Maru has already delivered code for General Raymond. So the Joint Mission System for Space, train wrecked under waterfall, it's now moving in an agile pipeline, delivering for the warfighter. Down at our PEO for Business Enterprise Systems, there's a software factory standing up to work mobile apps in our business and logistics systems. And we're working with our software maintenance squadrons, which have been renamed as software engineering squadrons, so that they can do agile development for us too. So our goal is to have software factories across the Air Force that are doing this agile DevOps coding. And if you like 1990s R&B music, we will not go chasing waterfalls anymore in the Air Force. So all of this is a good progress for us. It's helped us speed up acquisition. It's gotten us very close to the Century Challenge. I hope it convinces you that the first part of the strategy to be competitive can be achieved if we keep our foot on the accelerator. We can speed up acquisition in this century at a pace of relevance. But it's not enough. It's just a first step. The next step, you may have the engine, but what's going through it? Who's it working with? Is it working with the full might of the US industry base? Or is it working with a subset? Obviously, a rhetorical question. We're working with a subset. We will not compete and win, not over the long term, if we have one hand behind our back in terms of who we can partner with. Now, one thing we're going to have to be mindful of in this century is we have two industry bases. We need to own that, and both are going to need an independent strategy. So one is the one that probably jumps out. If we're talking about not being able to work with the full industry base, you all are very aware that we have historically had a difficult time working with commercial startups and commercial innovators. And the reason is simply that our contracting processes for working with small innovative companies are too slow, period. That was the thing that had to be tackled. We're not perfect yet, so I'm going to talk about pitch day in a second. It's not perfect, but it is a big start for us in showing that we understand what we need to do to be responsive to companies of this size. So if you're a startup and you're 10 to 20 people, you can't wait 3 months for that contract. Secretary mentioned this morning, 3 months is fast. That's not fast, right? That means that you are deaf to that kind of company. You have to be able to move in a week. We really want to be able to move in a day. If we can't move at that pace, then what it's going to mean is the next generation of tech companies, they may be small today, but they may not be small forever. Can we risk the next generation of companies not knowing us? Not knowing your Air Force or your Department of Defense. That's a naive position. We do not get the benefit of what happened after World War II. There is no guarantee that champions of industry are going to have been in the military, are going to know our mission, are going to think of their products as having a responsibility to national security. We have got to change ourselves into a partnership model. That's why I use the word partnership. We have to partner. We have to reach out. We have to make sure the next generation of companies find it easy to work with us, find us aligned with their goal of growing and impacting the world, but hopefully in a way that helps us as well. So to get this right, we can't treat the commercial companies that think of themselves as commercial or maybe dual use if we're lucky. We can't turn them into defense primes. And so Pitch Day will be a great example of getting the door open. We can bring you in, we can put you on contract in a single day, and even more impressively, if we continue you on subsequent awards, we can do that with credit cards as well, meaning that we can do cash flow, cash installments at a pace of relevance. But it's not enough to just have the door open. Where's the rest of the house? Where is the connection to our programs? Where's the lifelong connection to the Air Force? So the door open is important, but it's not enough. Now let's flip to the other side. Let's talk about the traditional defense industry base. So I've got to give a shout out to our space programs. Many of our big ACAT-1, these are the big programs, are doing an awesome job trying to grow the industry base within their program. So next generation OPIR, overhead persistent infrared, enhanced strategic SATCOM, and protected tactical SATCOM all have competitive prototyping in their plans so that they create a larger industry base than they were given. We need that thinking across the Air Force. It allows companies that may not be the top to contend, to make their own investments, and maybe in subsequent programs, knock the incumbent off the top. But here's the shortfall in just using prototyping inside our programs to expand the traditional industry base, is how frequently are our major programs? We're building the next generation of OPIR now. When is the next and the next? Our pace of new, high-tech, large programs is very short compared to the early Air Force, right? It takes decades between fighters, decades between tankers. We started off, it was years, in the small single digits. So a fundamental flaw that we have in working with the industry base is that we don't do enough big ideas, enough prototypes, enough diversifying, because the frequency of our awards is too slow. That takes us to the next step. We have to create a big idea pipeline. If we don't, then we have too few and far between opportunities. Whether you're a dual-use company or a defense prime, we don't have a pipeline to keep building and challenging old operational constructs or old industrial models. We're simply doing it in an ad hoc fashion. The Secretary mentioned this morning that she is doing a full review of science and technology, and a big part of that is how do we get high-tech science concepts into the field? Like, how do we get over the valley of death? There's no valley in a pipeline, right? Pipeline keeps flowing. It's important that we adopt this mentality because a pipeline is inherently competitive. We can't predict the future. If I told you what 2030 would be like, given that AI is so difficult to predict, and what about quantum systems? What about biological systems? What about nanosystems? What about where commercial companies are going in space? There are so many wild cards that we really have a whole deck of them. The future is so uncertain that it doesn't make sense to predict the adversary at that time frame and then build the Air Force that beats them. That's too risky. It's too prescriptive. We need to be creating new concepts constantly that challenge what our opponents think about us, that impose cost, that make them react to us, that pull them off their game plan. And right now, there's not a concerted effort to do it. We're trying to build one. My hope is that as we look at our new process to bridge science and technology into programs of record, that we will guide those programs strategically. They're some of the most important work we will do. I think there are a few programs that are currently in the pipeline, just by luck, that will help us get moving, but we need a lot more. So if you're here from industry and you've got a big idea, a war-winning idea, a game-changing idea, a cost-imposing idea, we need them. And we need to treat them differently than the baseline business of the Air Force. One idea that happens to be in our pipeline is the Advanced Battle Management System. That was a big choice for the Air Force, not to recap JSTARS, and to try to create that same capability that protects soldiers and Marines maneuvering forward in highly contested environment, to try to replicate that in a way that is survivable. We've never done anything like it. We are going to have to break it up, put part of it in space, part of it in air, potentially have an attritable layer, and have the networking and data sharing amongst all of it so that it works as one organism, even though it really is a separate, diversified family of systems. We've never done anything like that. It has to be shepherded differently because it will bring in next-gen technology, but in a framework that will move forward into a program of record. Hypersonics falls into this category. It is such an important capability for the Air Force that we have to push it through the pipeline as quick as we can. And there are other things that are coming very soon. We're looking at collaborative weapons and next generation concepts that we hope, even if we don't buy them, that by creating them, that we sharpen the industry base, that we help you take the next step, that we help your design teams become better. And even if we don't buy them in quantity, that the question of whether we did or would changes what our adversaries think about us. If you followed anything that I did when I worked in OSD, this was pretty much my job. It was a big idea pipeline. It can be done, Air Force, but we have to commit to it. And if we don't, I think the opportunities to keep our industry base sharp will be too few and far between, too ad hoc to compete over decades. So we've got to get this right. But it takes me to the last part of this four-part strategy, and it's the most Washington of questions, which is how are we going to pay for this? There's really only one place. If you stand back from the Air Force, you stand back from our programs, 70% of our life cycle cost is in sustainment. And who here does sustainment for the Air Force or logistics? Who represents that community? I see some hands. Well, if you're near one of those people, give them a high five, because going around our sustainment enterprise, some of the most innovative people I have seen, right? As the operational Air Force is defying gravity, these people are defying entropy every day, keeping things flying that shouldn't be. So if you're in logistics and sustainment, just know I'm in your corner. I have some of the most creative people I've seen. The other thing you'll see if you go across this enterprise is not a lot of technology, not the things you would see in commercial industry. You're not going to see 3D printers. You're not going to see data analytics. And if we look at what it's doing in commercial companies, it's saving a lot of money and actually increasing efficiency. So I've got to give a big shout out to our Rapid Sustainment office. It's a new office. It's been around for 4 months. It's already transitioned new technologies, commercial technologies, into our depots. 4 I'll highlight for you. Additive manufacturing, probably obvious to you that we have the chance of printing parts ourselves, right? That's a novel concept for us, but historically it's not novel, right? Militaries in the past, if you went back and we asked Julius Caesar to come join us here, he had to be able to shoot arrows and also make them. Right? We're getting back to the point where we can make things. It's airplane parts today. We've certified broad classes of metal and plastic parts, both safety critical and not, but there'll be a lot more to come. There's a lot of fundamental science and engineering to do, but every bit of it saves money over competing that in commercial industry. In addition to additive manufacturing, there's additive repair. So the RSO has already transitioned cold spray into our depots, into 2 of them, Tinker and Robbins. People are trained to use it, are using it today, and saving millions of dollars by replacing metal on parts as opposed to scrapping them and buying new ones. And the one that I'm most excited about is predictive maintenance. So this is using AI and data analytics from all sorts of sensors within our logistics system to predict when a part needs to be replaced. So probably none of you drive your car until it breaks down and then go get the oil changed. Right? You can predict when you need to do it. And probably none of you do it at 3,000 miles like I don't, because you know 5,000 is good enough because the data supports that. We're doing the same thing. I've got to give a big shout out to our C5 program office and our B1 program office. Over 140 algorithms deployed, predicting maintenance errors before they occur, increasing our readiness and saving us money. And the last technology is just plain cool. We've got lasers on robots that take paint off of our airplanes. So lasers, robots, count me in. And they save over $1 million per plane, just precision stripping. So I don't know where this is going, but I see the potential for big savings and sustainment, enough that potentially we can afford that big idea pipeline. 70% of our budget in sustainment, if we only saw 5 to 10% savings, that's a lot of high-tech prototyping. That's a lot of big ideas coming through the pipeline. So stepping back from the Air Force, we do have a strategy that closes to be able to compete and win in this century. We can't fail in any portion of it. I think we've gotten off to a great start in speeding up the engine. Pitch Day will be our first entree to have an open door to non-traditional companies with dual-use technologies, but it needs to be more than that. Prototyping is helping our defense industry base, but we need to do more than that. We will shepherd through the first generation of big ideas, but we need to be discussing those at every AFA. And if we don't drop the cost of sustainment, how will we possibly pay for this competitive acquisition system in this century? I'll leave you with a word. So it's an obscure word, but I like obscure words. I was trying, when we were shifting to going fast, to try to find a word that meant sustainable speed. Not just fast, not just a blip on the map, but something that's constant and sustained. And you may have a better vocabulary than I do, but I can't really think of one, so I did a lot of searching. And there's an old archaic word, celerity, and it means swiftness of motion. And the implication is the kind of motion that can be sustained over time, the way a horse runs. Not just a fleeting lap, but a race. It's also the reason why the speed of light is represented by the letter C. If you didn't know that, it's because of the word celerity. And if you don't know anything about physics, the speed of light is unflinching, it's unwavering, it can't be contested by anything. We need light speed in all of our endeavors, Air Force. We're off to a great start, but this can't be the only AFA we talk about this. We need to talk about it every time, keep our foot on the accelerator, and remember that while we're ready to go fight and win today, we are also competing to fight and win tomorrow. Let's take some of your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Roper. And we have many more questions than we can possibly get to, so let's get right to them. You've talked about delegation authority for major programs. What is your sense of how this will help improve the acquisition timeline?
Delegation is everything. So I remember being a young program manager and having to brief senior leadership on my program and having to act like the questions they asked were good questions. And I'm that guy now. So the expertise in the program offices is amazing, and we're going to bet on it. You know, one of the things that is clear to me is the operational side of the Air Force gets that you got to delegate to win, right? You've got to delegate to the lowest level that can execute commander's intent. We're simply doing that in acquisition. The program office, depending on the size, is the equivalent of the squadron or the wing, and we're trusting them to be able to make decisions within our intent far from home. The Pentagon, we have to remember, we don't make anything, right? We just generate paper. So keeping acquisition out in the field is where it ought to be. And if they make mistakes, that's part of what we have to accept as an Air Force. Everything is a distribution. So if we're not seeing the failures, then we're not also seeing the great successes. And one thing I noticed on my phone right before walking out here is that we've just announced our first round of Spectacular Learning Event awards. Spectacular Learning Event is our word for good failure. We're starting to reward program offices that take good risk. So two I'll highlight for you. One is our 500-pound bomb Yuan that tried a couple of weapons for 6 months and none of them worked. But they learned enough to refine their requirements. They learned, and now they're a better acquisition system for it. Another is our Air Force Special Warfare Division that needed to deliver a couple of UAVs to AFSOC really quickly. They got a couple of commercial ones. 6 months later, they realized they wouldn't work. But they learned enough to tell the command, a commercial off-the-shelf UAV will not meet your mission. Those are not failures. That is a great acquisition approach. Start by doing things in the real world, learn, refine, improve. We need to do that across the board, and all of that should happen out in the field.
Thank you, sir. The acquisition workforce is chronically understaffed on the military side. Many of the civilians are approaching retirement years. What advice would you give commanders? What advice would you give acquisition experts on keeping the pace, the celerity that you described, so that it's a sustainable effort to improve acquisition in the Air Force?
Well, I mean, I think that's an issue everyone faces. We're a smaller force than we need to be. It was highlighted by the Secretary. The Air Force we need is bigger. And if we have a larger set of squadrons, then there will have to be a larger acquisition force supporting them. I mean, stepping back, right, the Air Force is awesome, right? We build systems no one else builds, the most high-tech airplanes, satellites, bombers, cyber tools. We can sustain them around the world. We're a logistics company. We're like a Walmart and a UPS and an airline all together. What an amazing organization. If we were to write it down on paper, someone would say this is too science fiction. There's no way this works. This works. but we have to have talent and enough of it to sustain it. One area that I think gives us a little glimmer of hope is that as we move into software acquisition and doing DevOps, you can often hear the dev, but there's an ops side. And I don't think we have to have everyone who does software development get all the DAU acquisition certifications. I think we can get operators in that understand software and understand their mission and allow them to do software development for us. So we have a team working that right now. And if you don't think it's possible, a lot of the great leaders up at Kessel Run are operators. They're not acquisition professionals. Maybe that allows us to have more of the operational side of the Air Force come into acquisition, work on software that improves their mission, and then go back out in the field and use it.
Thank you. Secretary Peters in his opening comments this morning, Secretary Wilson in her brilliant comments today, and now you have talked about speeding the acquisition process. But as anyone who's spent time in the five-sided house of pleasure can tell you, there's a programming process and there's a budgeting process. Do you have any views on how those processes could be speeded to match what we're trying to do in acquisition?
I think the Air Force has already taken a big step. I mean, we can't do 804 programs without our budgeters and our programmers understanding that they have an option. They can fund more if that's needed, or they can fund fewer things and push down the accelerator on them. You know, whether something needs to go fast should really not be an acquisition choice. We should go as fast as we can with the money we have, but it should be the commander that decides, I need this program to go light speed. This one can deliver, slower than that. So presenting options is what we need to do. But I really do mean what I said about it takes a team to go fast. When we do an acquisition review, a lot of the people sitting around the table don't work for me. Right? We have finance people, lawyers, test, operators. Right? Everyone at that table has to agree that we want to move. But going fast, aside from being absolutely necessary to compete, is a lot more energizing than going slow. I mean, if we gave the talk slower, dumber acquisition, none of you would probably be here to hear it, right? Going fast is energizing, right? There's something about a tight deadline that makes people rise to the occasion. So even though this is an acquisition talk, it's not really. It's an Air Force talk. The Air Force is moving fast. The Air Force is building things faster and smaller, and I'm just happy to be part of the team.
In the 1 minute we have left, Dr. Roper, would you share with us what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? What keeps you up?
The industry base. So speeding up acquisition is a tough enough challenge alone. But, just step back from it. The Cold War model of acquisition is not bad. It won the Cold War. So let's just go ahead and say it was a good model for what it was needed for, but it just doesn't make sense today. And the longer we stick with it, the longer we will continue to shrink our industry base. The competitions are few and far between to invite new companies to try to jump in and compete against the stalwart workhorses that we still need. So don't think this is about not needing our traditional companies. We need them. But we can't create an environment that continues to collapse the number of companies that work with us. So this is bigger than the Air Force. But in my view, we can't just say, well, it's bigger than us, so hopefully someone will solve it. No, it's not. We have to solve this problem. We're the Air Force. We do impossible things. So we're going to grow the industry base. And I can see the kind of, we're going to grow the industry base. We have to all believe this. It will not be an acquisition thing. It will be an Air Force thing. If we don't, we won't see the impacts this year or next year. But what happens 10 to 15 years from now? When there are new companies that are selling you things and pushing analytics that we haven't heard their names today, but they're household names in future, and they have no connection with us, or even worse, don't want to work with us. Like, how would we possibly compete against countries that have more centralized, authoritative control that can make their industry bases work with them? And yes, I'm thinking specifically of China. The model does not work if we are not a partner with industry that grows the base. So the thing I worry about the most is that. The thing we will focus the most this year is that. And we have to have a solution for dual-use companies as well as our traditional. We need everyone on the team to win.
Dr. Roper, on behalf of all of our attendees and about 100,000 AFA members worldwide, thank you. To call your comments brilliant would be to understate it. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd ask you to remain in place while we reset, and then I'd make another request. If you're not a member of AFA, I'd invite you to visit the AFA booth out in the foyer sometime while you're here, and we have a great deal for you on membership. Thank you for being here.